Sure. Are we live? We are live. Okay. Hello. Weekly Roundup. Here we are. It is August the 9th, 2024. I'm David Dayen, executive editor of the American Prospect. With me, senior editor Gabrielle Gurley. How you doing?
I'm doing okay here in rain-drenched Washington, D.C. So we're not getting
Now, now you were away. You had a vacation, great vacation for a few weeks, and you came back to an entirely different world. Everything had changed
everything had
politically.
changed. Yes.
You left like right at the beginning of July, just as this sort of uh, get Biden to step down talk was starting to heat up, and now it is fully baked, fully heated, and Kamala Harris is the nominee. And this week, we learned who her vice presidential nominee would be, and that is Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. And they've had a series of barnstorming tour speeches that they've done in swing states. They were actually, speaking of the weather, they were actually supposed to go down to North Carolina and Georgia. That was going to be part of the swing. But because of what I guess became a tropical storm,
Hmm.
Debbie, they canceled the North Carolina and Georgia part of the swing. But they are going to be in Arizona today and Nevada tomorrow. And I'm actually going to Nevada to check in on this new energy in the Democratic Party. And we've talked about this a little bit offline, but I'm wondering if you want to express sort of your thoughts at this really sort of stunning turnaround that we've had in Democratic politics.
Well, and it was stunning. I wasn't exactly on the Shapiro bandwagon. That is, I didn't see having a relative.
Shapiro, just be clear, you mean Josh Shapiro, the president,
Josh
the
Shapiro, the
governor of
governor of
Pennsylvania,
Pennsylvania.
who was like the second choice for vice
Right.
president.
Everyone had pretty much let's say many people in the news media had already plugged him in as the choice. But as a new governor with not much visibility other than a very successful repair to Interstate 95 that he did in record time, it was difficult for me to see the allure of Shapiro for the ticket. So looking around at some of the other names, Bashir was a Southerner. He like Shapiro, that is Andy Bashir, the governor of Kentucky.
Right.
He was a state attorney general like Shapiro. Ticket didn't really need two former state attorney generals on the ticket. That left you with Mark Kelly, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, the astronaut. Uh, Astronauts, who doesn't love astronauts in America? He's a border state senator. But again, he came with a little bit of baggage as far as it was on his gun control stance. His wife obviously was the victim of a assassination attempt. So there would be questions about, in some rural states, about his views on gun control. There are some involvement in some is hawking vitamins at some point that
Yes, it
people
was
had
a
drawn
Shackley.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Shackley is a
So
multi-level marketing kind of. Someone called it a scheme. Actually, my members of my family, my wife's family at least, are Shackley people.
oh, okay.
But
But then
yeah,
yeah, but
go
here
ahead.
comes the governor of Minnesota, out of the Midwest, and it seems like the more you hear about Tim Walz, the better he looks as the pick. I mean, you can just go down his resume from being a member of Congress, which is um, a member of the House, uh, to being a social studies teacher, to being in the Army National Guard, to helping LGBTQ students at his high school form
Hmm.
basically a gay straight alliance. I mean, he ticks all, he's a gun owner. Um, Apparently, according to Vice President Harris at the Philadelphia rally, is a pretty competent sharpshooter
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
done really well with all the sharpshooting contests. Who knew? Um,
Yeah, there are sharpshooting contests in
contest
Congress.
on
It's
Capitol
interesting.
Hill. So it's a
Yeah,
sort of like the more you learn about Tim Walz, the more he seems very appropriate and fills in all sorts of gaps that Kamala Harris,
yeah,
and even down to his lack of financial investments. He is a very modest retirement, pre-retirement portfolio. So it seems like he was a very good pick. He's quick on his feet,
hmm,
um, with the quips and with the attacks, if you
yeah.
will, was something that, for example, Mark Kelly, there was some fear that he would not be able to do that. So for the moment, it seems like a good pick. But at the Philadelphia rally, Vice President Harris did admit that the team is still, they are still the underdogs. And I think that is quite correct at this point.
Yeah, we'll get into that. I just want to mention two things to follow up on Walls. One thing that I wrote about when I wrote our, intro, like announcing upon the announcement of the candidate, I wrote a piece about Walls, and one thing that I didn't include in there that I think is important. So the thing I did include was, Walls's record. I think this is what attracted Harris. That Walls's record, in particular, last year getting a number of bills passed through a very thin majority in Minnesota, had a 1 seat majority in the state Senate, not much more in the state House. And many of the things that he passed are actually items that it looks like Kamala Harris wants to pass. They were a lot of the missing pieces from the Build Back Better agenda,
Mm,
particularly around the care economy.
yeah.
So Walz passed a family medical leave bill in Minnesota. He passed investments in childcare. He passed
Mhm.
investments in long-term care. He added seats for a more universal pre-kindergarten program in Minnesota. And all of those things I think are at the top of the list. And some of this I'm extrapolating. It's the fact that these are the things that were left over from Build Back Better that didn't get passed, and
Sure.
also Harris has mentioned them in speeches repeatedly,
Mhm.
that this is what she wants to do. So, he brings that governing experience of you getting a very thin majority to agree on these specific issues. And if Harris wins, she's going to have a thin majority. Everybody knows that. The Senate is going to be at best, I think at best 50 votes. You could say maybe Colin Allred can win in Texas or Debbie McCarcel Powell can win in Florida, but I think those are long shots to say
Right.
the least. So you figure there's a 51 vote Senate right now for Democrats. Joe Manchin has retired. They're going to lose West Virginia. If they keep everything else, they'll have 50 votes. So they'll have the thinnest possible majority in the
Sure.
Senate. And this was kind of where Walz was at in Minnesota. And he rallied that group of legislators to pass this particular agenda, which is the same agenda that
Mm.
Harris wants to pass. So I think that attracted her. And actually, some of the reporting afterwards, after I wrote this, was more of a surmise. Some of the reporting afterwards said that's what she was attracted to.
Right.
Um,
And by contrast, Shapiro has a Republican Senate,
Right.
and
So he can't
he
he
can't
can't
get
have
anything
that.
passed.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he did pass universal breakfast, school breakfast in Pennsylvania. He's passed a couple things, but he's always needed bipartisan support, right?
Right.
So it's going to be more limited. Same with Bashir, whose main record was vetoing bad bills from the very right wing
Mm.
Kentucky legislature. And often getting overridden on those vetoes. So, yeah, the records are quite different. I think the other thing that we're starting to see play out as they start to cross the country in these battleground states is that there is this sense, I think Walz even used this word of joy, of and
Mhm.
actually I don't know if I would call it joy as much as relief. So
Even
we were,
enthusiasm. There's a lot of
yeah,
enthusiasm.
there definitely, but we were headed into this campaign. I think even those of us who work in this in politics with some dread that we
Mhm.
were going to have these two much older candidates, maybe too old for the job, and we were going to watch them, yell at each other about their golf games for the next 5 months, and it was going to be a real slog
Mhm.
and a bit of a horror show. And now I think that Harris's affect and Walz's as well is really of that of a happy warrior. That some people who are in politics for the reason of improving people's lives, which is something Walz has said a lot. He actually comes out of the group Wellstone Action. Paul
Yeah.
Wellstone was the senator from Minnesota. He died in a plane crash in 2002. But his entire kind of belief system was that politics is about improving people's lives. And
Mhm.
we can be happy while we're doing it. So there's a bit of Wellstone, there's a bit of Hubert Humphrey, who was known as the happy
A
warrior.
happy warrior. Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so I think that's another thing that Walz, from a political standpoint, brings to the ticket is this enthusiasm, this verve, this ability to, stick the knife in when you have to in terms of playing politics, but do it with a smile.
Yeah, and when you have a parade of former students crediting you with getting you to stay in school and to
Right,
graduate, and fun videos of him riding county fair rides with his daughter.
right,
Um, Now all the pictures of Waltz with people's dogs are coming out, and he's being compared, look at our governor in Minnesota. It's not like that governor in, across the way uh,
right,
with Christy Noem, with
right,
right,
right. The dogs in particular. Yeah,
getting rid of dogs. So it really is positive, which is something that we haven't been able to say about political
right,
discourse in this country. There was a lot of mention at the Philadelphia rally of freedoms, defending freedoms, looking towards the future. That was a theme
right.
in Governor Shapiro's remarks. He mentioned that quite a bit. So between
Yeah,
freedom and looking to the future and not going back, I think this team, I think the positivity that radiates from this particular team um, will say a lot to
yeah.
people, for example, who are on the fence about what they're going to do.
I agree. I've seen that Shapiro do that freedom riff. He actually did it in the last campaign event of 2022, which I
Mm,
happened to be at because I was home in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It was up
mhm.
at Bucks County Community College. It was him and Fetterman. And he did that exact riff about we're the ones for freedom, they're not. And it's very powerful.
It is
And,
powerful.
if you go back to Joe Biden's big speech, also in Philadelphia, that was about democracy.
Mhm.
It was a much darker vision. It was very much focused on Donald Trump and his vision for the country and how we're in a battle to save democracy. And,
Mhm.
Biden ran that in 2020 and it was successful because it was a moment where we had been coming out of 4 years of Donald Trump. I
Mhm.
think I think this message is more calibrated for the moment, which is we've been kind of wincing for 8 years and we want to hear about the future. We want to hear about this movement forward to perfect our union, etc.
Yeah,
um
some of
yeah,
the warnings, Project 2025, are good to remind people. But as you mentioned, you have to offer what is it that Democrats have on offer to
right,
counteract that. And this new team has to drive that home at every opportunity, because I think the electorate is actually exhausted. You see that with
Yeah,
people turning away from news sites, not wanting, if I hear another person say to me, I really don't even want to think about the election, that's where America's mindset seems to be. And if they can restore some sort of
right.
enthusiasm for the democratic experiment at this juncture, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I think it absolutely was where America's mindset was when it was a Biden-Trump race. That exhaustion, that level of despair. Is this all we have? Is this all we have on offer for us? There's a question in the comments about Kennedy. He's dropping like a stone, mainly because I think people were so desperate for something else that they were looking anywhere, and so they saw a name that they knew, Kennedy, and they he had risen in the polls to about, I think his ceiling, which was about 10%. And now it's half that and falling.
Yeah,
And obviously
Kennedy,
there was a thing this
yeah.
week about the bear and Central Park and all that. But
Yeah,
yeah, there,
Rob, he has not been doing himself any favors, and if he had
no,
half the charisma and energy of his father, he might be better situated. But he is really the antithesis, if you will, of the message he
on
got
100%.
of from Bobby Kennedy in 68. I mean, it's really
It's very dark.
stunning.
It's
It's
very
stunning.
ominous. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and for people who don't, people who remember Bobby Kennedy, I'm sure they're scratching their head and said, this is the son, this is what we get. So him playing on his family name really is not helping him at all, because he's such a contrast. He's such a
Yeah.
contrast from the Kennedys in politics that Americans are familiar with.
So we had another question in the chat saying, this is from Jared, saying that he's been reading about Tim Walz's climate record. Says, might the GOP hammer Walz in his response to the Line 3 pipeline protests? You may know more about that than I
Um,
do.
Actually, I'm not familiar with his response to the I must confess
To
to the
Line 3, yeah.
line three. I mean, something obviously that I can look into and circle back at some point. But I'm sorry, I'm
But what
not.
I do know, what I do know is that Minnesota passed a renewable energy standard,
Mm,
which says, I believe by either 2035 or 2040, that 100% of all electricity in the state would be powered by renewable energy.
mm,
So that's something that we've seen in other states as well. And it's kind of the thing that was missing, another missing link kind of from the climate agenda federally. That wasn't something that was able to get passed. But the fact that they got it passed in Minnesota is a testament to where he's at on climate. Now, the Republicans are starting to try to define Tim Walz. We've seen that throughout the week, just like they're trying to define Kamala Harris. They are using the communism word quite a bit.
mm,
And then they're also engaged in this kind of misinformation tactic around Tim Walz's military record. This is reminiscent of the Swift boat attacks that we saw 20 years ago against John Kerry. In this case, they're claiming that Walz retired because he knew his unit, his National Guard unit, was going to be deployed to Iraq. The reality is that he decided after 24 years in the military to go into politics. He he filed for a House election in Minnesota in February of 2005. And there wasn't any inkling that his unit would be moved to Iraq until months later. He actually in public said, I'm willing to do whatever it is, but I'm staying in this race because that's where I feel like I'm most needed. He then retired and had his retirement done in May of 2005. And it was only a couple months later that the unit was told specifically. There were rumors prior to that he addressed but they were only specifically told that they were going to go to Iraq, I believe in June of 2005 or July.
Mhm.
So it was months after he had actually retired. This is a pretty tired attack. It turns out that Chris LaCivita, who is the Trump campaign manager, actually was the one of the driving forces behind the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth. So it's actually the same person
Mhm.
who is forwarding these attacks. I think they're pretty weak. However, I mean, it connects a little bit to something you wrote about this week, which is, these kind of accusations fly on social media where there isn't a lot of ability to come up with one truth that everybody believes,
Yeah.
and to get factual information. So,
Mhm.
maybe talk about that and what you wrote about, which was in a different context, or unless you want to, follow on the Walz Swift boat attack
Well, the
here.
only thing I'll say about the Swift boat attacks is I think this team, Waltz, unlike John Kerry, did not take it as seriously as he perhaps should have and fight back as assiduously as I think
Kerry didn't, you say?
John
Kerry
Kerry.
didn't take it seriously. Yes, he said he was above it and he didn't want to
Yeah,
even address it
exactly.
at
And
all.
he thought
Yeah,
just asserting that he was above it was going to make it go away, and it did not. I think Walls is quite capable of defending himself at every opportunity. So I don't think we'll seem to see the same sort of response. And if we don't see the same sort of response, it should not hopefully have legs. As far as my report this week, I wrote about the five secretaries of state from Minnesota, Michigan, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Washington, who wrote a very actually kind letter to Elon Musk asking
uh-huh.
him to rein in his Grok chatbot on the social media platform X, formerly Twitter. And Grok had put out some erroneous ballot deadlines, or said that the
Right.
deadline passed
Right,
in
right.
in the
This was in
United States.
relation. This was
Mm,
in relation to when Biden passed the torch to
right.
Harris, right? And so what the ballot what Grok said was that actually the ballot deadline is passed in 9 states, and so Harris can't get on the ballot. That was the implication,
Yeah,
which was completely untrue.
it's completely
There was
true. Yeah.
no nominee yet for the Democratic Party. Now we actually do formally this week have a nominee, and it's Kamala Harris, and she's going to have no problem getting on any ballot in the United States.
And it took X a week to address this problem. They finally addressed it, but it took them a week to do so. So this is very concerning, along with Musk's interest in deepfakes. He loves deepfakes. He likes to share them. This is going to be
Right,
a problem because he shows no inclination to resist these temptations to
right,
put up whatever his heart desires on his own personal platform, which is
right,
what X has turned into for
right.
misinformation. And you don't have to look any further than what he's done in Great Britain to kind of foment
Mm-hmm.
disorder and all sorts of erroneous statements about the far right unrest that's happening there. He actually he actually shared a post, a fake post from the Daily Telegraph that said that right-wing detainees were going to be sent to the Falklands.
Mm,
Completely false.
mm,
Shared it, apparently was up for about a half an hour, and then it was pulled, but had been seen, according to one source, by about 2 million people. So, and even in the UK, which has some pretty strong regulatory tools, uh, it's people seem to be a little stumped as to what to do about the
right,
disinformationist that is Elon Musk. And this is particularly concerning going into a situation with ordinary voters who don't lack who lack the tools or the sophistication or the interest in
Right.
investigating some of the more outlandish things that they find on social media. It's always, wow,
Yeah.
wow, this is crazy. Why don't I share it? And that's how
Right.
things go viral. And that's how trouble
Yeah.
starts.
So
Um, yeah.
I'd say two things here. One is that if you thought social media was a wild west in 2016, it's much wilder
It's
today.
worse. Yeah.
It's now you have someone who owns a large social media site who has endorsed one of the candidates for
Mhm.
president, is actually having a sit down talk with
Interview.
that
Yeah.
candidate on Monday,
Mhm.
and at least at one point was interested in donating money to that campaign, although it's unclear exactly whether or not he's going to do that.
Yeah.
He disavowed it. And so you have a very partisan cast put onto the sort of town square, anything goes environment that is social media. So that's number one. Number two, in the piece, you talked about how one of the ways this could manifest that actually has a long history, not just online, but offline, is disinformation around voting itself,
Right.
around the patterns of voting. So could you talk about
Yeah.
that and the
So that is
historical resonance of that?
it's a time, place, and manner of voting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Communities of color, Latino communities, African American communities, and Asian American communities were targeted in 2020. But African American communities in particular have long been targeted with false information about voting. Vote on Wednesday. If you don't make it to the polls on Tuesday, you can vote on Wednesday.
Right,
In no place in the United States is that possible.
right,
I can remember as a kid in Philadelphia getting really weird flyers in the mailbox about changes in voting locations. It's not down at the
mm-hmm,
church,
mm-hmm,
it's at a school that's 10 blocks away, or across the city.
mm-hmm.
There are things like that happen quite regularly,
Right,
and not just in communities of color, but any community, all communities to some, well, I can't say all communities, but there are many communities that have been targeted, particularly with false information about what is called time, manner, and place of
right,
voting. So people either will not vote because a quote unquote news site is inconvenient, or that the time is wrong. I mean,
right,
you can go
right.
back to the Biden robocall during the New Hampshire primary. Says, don't you don't have to vote now. You can just wait until November.
Right,
Um, and
right,
who knows how many people that may
right.
have discouraged or
And you
split.
wrote about that too. So whereas in the past you had to create a flyer, you had to target a community to get addresses. Now you can just put a site up, put a post up on social media, or create an AI chat bot and do robocalls off it. You can do all of these things. It's less time intensive, might be cheaper even, and it reaches the same amount, if not more, people. I think that's one of the big issues here. And so you talk to some, people that are experts in elections about this trend, and I mean, what did they have to say?
Well, one thing that did come up in these conversations and with other conversations I have is that what particularly communities of color may do is rely on influencers in particular neighborhoods to get out the message that a particular piece of information is either correct
Right,
or incorrect.
right,
Now, what is both good about that. Sometimes people will listen to popular radio hosts or community leaders or their faith leaders when they speak about a particular issue. What is concerning about that is that there are people who are also propagating disinformation, who are influencers.
Right.
So it really behooves voters to check things out. And both of the experts from the Brennan Center and the Joint Center for Politics and Economics
Mm-hmm.
here in Washington basically stress that voters are going to have to do their due diligence and check with
Yeah.
news sites, and not just one news site, but maybe multiple news sites, as say journalists do if there's an event. Well, let me just cross-check a bunch of sources that I rely on to see if there is consistent either reporting or any reporting at all, to see if
Right.
something is valid. So that is the concerning thing, that people are just not aware how prevalent disinformation is, and it's not just domestic sources or
Right.
domestic people. It's cyber criminals, it's foreign actors, it's China, it's Russia, it's
Right.
Iraq, who have interfered in our elections in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah. You know, 4 years ago, to just keep the social media example going, Mark Zuckerberg spent a lot of money on nonpartisan voting information. That was primarily he helped fund. I believe he helped fund some election facilities as well to keep staffers and keep them upgraded and things. But he also made a point on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp to provide that information, uh, just basic voting information, where you can vote, when, if there's early voting in your area, if there's
Mhm.
mail-in voting in your area, that kind of thing. Now we have the head of the social media side, who I can easily see posting some of the things that you just said. Like vote on Wednesday or or,
Yeah, yeah.
or whatever. So it's a different landscape. Obviously, Facebook's inattention allowed some things to happen in 2016, but it's a very different and concerning landscape, and we're going to keep paying attention to it
Yeah,
and give
yeah,
people the information.
yeah. It's very concerning, particularly since election administrators don't have the resources that they're being pummeled with all this, and they don't have the
Right.
resources to respond.
And they're like a direct target now. I mean,
Yeah,
election administration is literally a public enemy in the eyes of at least one political movement in America. And what we're going to see after the election is perhaps as important as what we're going to see in the election.
right. It's not
Um,
just election day, but it's in the certification processes that happen
right.
afterwards.
And I know you're going to be covering that in the coming weeks. I want to go to actually our print issue, which I have, but I have my computer propped up, and way underneath, is the actual print issue. Otherwise, I would pull it out. But our print issue covered, we kind of had a broad rubric of the future
Mhm.
of certain institutions, and the thing that you wrote for it kind of looked at the future of a set of fights that we've seen in mostly in big cities in America over the last several decades, and that is whether or not cities should be spending public money to put up stadiums for use by uh, sports teams owned by wealthy individuals. And I thought it was a really interesting piece, and you talk about sort of this trajectory of in the past, a lot of these stadiums and arenas were kind of maybe not rubber stamp, but they would get through, and
Mhm.
a lot of money would be expended on them. And now it's a little more contested. So talk about that change.
Well, the reason we're seeing a lot of discussion of stadiums is that in the late 1990s and early 2000s, that generation of stadiums was being built. That was
Right.
the last period of flurry of activity of building new stadiums. 30 years on, um, the Roman Colosseum is still standing, but for some reason, 30 years seems to be the expiration date for stadiums. I mean, structurally, most of these places could probably stand for another 30, 50, 80 years. But people like the new and the shiny. And so that is what's
Right.
happening. But what you're seeing in communities across the country, from Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, Alexandria, Virginia, to Kansas City and the Oakland area, is people saying, sure, go ahead and build these things, but don't use taxpayer money to do it. In the 90s and early 2000s, it was less contentious.
Right.
People have gotten wise as tax monies coming in continues to dwindle. The prospect of spending $1 billion on a stadium or an arena is not particularly enticing to neighborhoods, for example, particularly
And
without
that's
consulting them.
right.
That's
And that's part of it, right? Is that
Mhm.
the price of these things has gone way up.
Right.
Whereas you could build sort of cookie cutter stadiums like in the 1970s. We're both from Philadelphia. We had Veterans Stadium. It was a multi-purpose stadium that football and baseball was played in. There were several of those around the country. They looked all the same. They were kind of ugly. Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Philadelphia. They had basically all these multi-purpose units. And now you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's out of
The 90s brought in these sort of throwback kind of baseball stadiums like Camden Yards in Baltimore, that were trying to look like Wrigley Field. Wrigley Field's been up for 100 years. Or trying to look like Fenway Park
Fenway Park,
in
yeah.
Boston. And they
Mhm.
wanted to move these things also from the suburbs, like
Back to the town. Mhm.
like back into the downtown, like Landover, Maryland was where the Capitol Center, I believe it was called, in the DC area was, and then they moved to a downtown, the Capital One Arena, which is it's very near our offices. It's right in Gallery Place, Chinatown
In
of
China.
Washington, and so you know what you talk about. Kind of the main thing you focus on in the piece is a similar effort to put an arena downtown in Philadelphia or near downtown, adjacent to Chinatown.
Mhm.
Whereas there was a sports complex in Philadelphia for forever that is sort of on the periphery. It's at the confluence of I-95 and the Schuylkill
Mhm.
Expressway, and everyone drives there and gets to it. But it's away from everything, even though it's technically in the city limits. To move this downtown, and there's been some pushback here. So
There's
tell us
been
about that.
yeah, there's been resistance because and the situation is very similar to what happened in Washington, D.C., is that as you mentioned, it butts up against Chinatown and Philadelphia's Chinatown. Philadelphia's Chinatown is still a very vibrant, active residential area. Um,
And a community of color, largely,
and
right?
community of color, and first stop, as many Chinatowns are for Asian immigrants into the city, and other immigrant groups as well, because they have the social setups
Mm-hmm.
that immigrants require when they come to the United States. So that is the owners of the Philadelphia 76ers, the NBA basketball team. Is pushing very hard. They have offered, they put money on the table to build it. So, and they claim that there won't be any Philadelphia taxpayer dollars.
Right.
It leaves open the question of whether there'll be Pennsylvania taxpayer dollars uh,
Right.
uh, used in that arena. But also butting up against Chinatown is the fact that that is one of the least developed parts of the central part of Philadelphia. and
right.
there are acres behind it that are also undeveloped. So the neighborhood groups are not just Chinatown, but other downtown neighborhood groups are saying this is just a play for the undeveloped areas of downtown
Hmm.
Philadelphia. So this struggle is going to be going on. The decider in this struggle is not the mayor, but a city councilman for that district who has a say in.
Yeah, like veto rights
He
almost,
has
right?
veto, almost like veto rights. It's very unofficial. It's not really. It's a kind of a
Hmm.
traditional
Hmm.
understanding that if a city councilor wants something in their district, that city councilor gets in that district. Now, whether the rest of the city council is willing to buck that tradition
Right,
is kind of who knows at this point. So
right,
that is the battle that is underway in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Chinatown has fought off a number of these projects.
right,
In 2000, there was a proposal to move the Philadelphia Phillies, the Major League Baseball team, to the neighborhood. They fought that off. They fought off two casinos and a
right,
federal prison. So they
hmm,
kind of know what they're up against. But their fear is
right.
that if it gets built, um, what happened in DC to Chinatown will happen in Philadelphia.
And what is that? What did happen in
What
DC?
is that both these neighborhoods have, glorious Chinatown friendship arches,
Hmm.
but and Philadelphia has, I said, very vibrant area. In DC, it's Chinatown in name only. There are some
Hmm.
signs that are in Chinese. There are a few restaurants, but between the presence of the arena that was built there, which drove out quite a few
Hmm.
of the remaining residents, an exodus that had actually started after the 1968 riots, that kind of finished it off. And if
Hmm.
that didn't finish it off, the pandemic most certainly did.
Hmm.
Chinatown is a shell of its former self. Restaurants are trying to get reestablished, but they're not necessarily Chinese or Asian restaurants. So the Philadelphia Chinatown neighborhood leaders are very afraid that this is going to happen to them as
Right.
well. I'm seeing these sort of things all over the country. The
Yeah.
owner of the Washington Wizards and the Capitals, the basketball and hockey teams
Yeah,
his
this is the funny part.
operation,
So
tried to move his
after
operation to Virginia.
DC destroys Chinatown, they're like, "Oh, well, let's leave.
Yeah, let's leave
Let's go
and
to
let's go
Virginia."
to Alexandria. After all, they have a brand new metro station in this particular Alexandria neighborhood, and there's some land there, and we should just go to across the river, the
Right,
Potomac
right,
River. And that was uniformly blasted by fans, by local leaders, by residents in Alexandria, which is a wealthy, predominantly white
yeah.
neighborhood, who said, "Whoa, wait a minute, we didn't
We didn't
ask for
ask for
this,
this.
we didn't vote for this, so
Right,
why us? It'll destroy our neighborhood."
right,
Um, but Ted Leonosis and Governor Glenn Young, who basically proclaimed that this was a done deal, did not ask one of the top movers and
right,
shakers in the Virginia legislature, which had to sign off on the move.
right.
That was a woman named Senator L. Louise Lucas, who's the head of the Virginia Senate and Finance Administration and Finance, or Finance and Administration Committee.
Okay.
Um, Virginia had just switched over to Democratic control of both houses of the legislature, and she was the person who needed to be consulted. She wasn't, which maybe had something to do with the fact that she was an 80-year-old African American woman who'd been in the
Right,
legislature for 30 years. They didn't think that they needed to
right.
consult her. And she came up with a very humorous post on X, Twitter as I call it, that said,
Hmm.
anyone who thinks this is a paraphrase, anyone who thinks that I'm not getting benefits for my communities for this project must think I have dumbass written on my forehead. which was as you can
Not a
imagine,
good start for them.
not a
Yeah.
good start. But they did not come to her seeking her approval, or at least her support, and the project died.
Right.
And you're seeing this over across the country. In Kansas City, they're in the
Right.
county that the stadiums, the Royals and the you're gonna have to help me out, Haver, with the football team.
Kansas City Chiefs. Come on, it's
Chiefs,
Taylor Swift's favorite team.
Chiefs, yes, Taylor Swift's boyfriend's team.
Right.
Um, and despite that, despite the cachet of the
Right.
Chiefs, got voted down. Now,
Right. And now Kansas, which is across the river there, maybe it's not a river, but across the border, is trying to take that Royals Chiefs complex and say, we'll build a stadium for
we'll
you.
build a
Uh,
stadium.
but now, of course, that has to go through public opinion in Kansas. And there were other ones like in Phoenix, they tried to build a new arena for their hockey team, and that got voted down by the
That got
people.
voted down.
And a tech guy moved the whole team to Salt Lake City.
And
So
they didn't
you're
even put it to a vote in Oakland because probably for the A's and they're the Oakland A's baseball team and a new stadium, probably because they feared that it would get voted down.
Yeah, and there's been protests outside Oakland games all season long. They're actually leaving prematurely to go to a minor league baseball stadium in Sacramento for a couple of years because they can't take it in Oakland anymore while they wait for a stadium to be built in Las Vegas, which I think is giving a lot of public money to it. So we're seeing these battles play out all over the country. It's a really interesting dynamic. Like I said, there used to have two stadiums, one for baseball and football, one for basketball and
Mhm.
hockey. And now you need these bespoke stadiums, like even the arena in Philadelphia is only for basketball,
Yeah,
apparently.
it's only for
Uh,
basketball,
yeah,
and so it's going to
like
sit empty most of the
so,
time, and
so now you have
really, it state
exactly.
doesn't make any sense.
And now you have a proliferation of these stadiums, which I mean, I think sports do bring some, they certainly bring cachet to a
Sure.
city, and they bring some economic activity. But now you have four white elephants where you had two potentially
Yes.
in bigger cities, more so in a city like here in Los Angeles where you have multiple units. We have for years the Clippers and the Lakers are both NBA teams who played in the same stadium. And now this year, I believe, the Clippers open a new stadium in Inglewood, whereas the Lakers continue in their stadium downtown. So now it's basketball, and you have one city with two stadiums.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So you have this proliferation of these kind of white elephant stadiums that, as you say, are only occupied for a small period of time. There are only so many concerts. There are only so many other public events that you can throw into these stadiums. Most of the time, it's not a use of resources that is very productive.
Mhm.
For football, it's even worse, right? There's
Yeah.
8 or 9 home games a year. And people are reasonably asking, what are we paying for if we're paying public money to billionaire owners to put up these show palaces for them that
Mhm.
are really sort of testaments to their ego?
Yeah, exactly. And Josh Harris is one of the co-owners who's trying to bring this arena to Philadelphia for the 76ers, is also interested in building a new stadium for the Washington Commanders
Right,
on Capitol Hill, in a Capitol Hill neighborhood. And those residents don't want it either. They were hoping to get
right,
housing once
right.
K Stadium was torn down. And say, okay, great, this is our opportunity to get more housing, which Washington really, really needs, to get a supermarket, which in that part of Washington would serve another section of the city that does not have, that really has a deficit of supermarkets. It's really a food desert. He's involved in two different places and
Yeah.
two different projects in two different cities with residents who don't want the projects.
And that's one of the interesting things about Philadelphia is that one of the reasonable concerns is that if you're putting this big arena in the Chinatown area, that you're probably getting rid of some housing. So they said, oh well, don't worry about that. We'll put a tower on it. We'll put a tower on top of it, and that'll
Yeah.
be housing for people. But it's not just that this overruns housing potentially. It's also that it creates congestion, it creates traffic to that part of the city, and that part of the city actually is where the hospital that I was born in is actually Jefferson Hospital. And so you can imagine if you have 20,000 fans at an arena and they're all streaming in, and there's an ambulance that needs to get somebody to that hospital, what are
Mhm.
they going to do exactly?
Yeah, exactly. And Philadelphia, that part of Philadelphia is the old, part of the oldest part of the city. We're talking, 18th century size streets.
Right. Yeah. Very
We're
thin.
not
Yeah.
talking about, hey, let's put a boulevard so we can have this great new stadium development. No, we
Right.
have tiny, one lane in each direction. So it would
And the
be,
and the mass transit outside of buses is very underdeveloped in Philadelphia. I mean, the subway system is pretty meager, I would say, in that part of
it's pretty
Philadelphia.
meager. I mean, physically, as a transit system, it's there. But
Right.
unlike Washington, the Philadelphia transit system has a reputation, deservedly so, I'm sorry to say, of being dangerous, very
Right.
dangerous, in a way that many subway systems in this country are not. And so to
Right.
think that suburban fans are going to be taking certain sections of
Right.
subways to the game is not exactly
And there's also that muscle memory. I mean, being a suburban Philadelphia kid, when we go to games, they built I-95. Uh, Part of the purpose was to get people to the games, right? It's right on that corridor, and the
Mhm.
sports complex is right there. It's actually not a bad trip to get there, and the Schuylkill gets everybody from other parts of the city north south to on I-95 and east west on the Schuylkill. And people just have that memory of, well, if I want to go to the game, I drive the game. Like
Well, the thing
that's
is, yeah,
what you do.
the thing is that this city, Philadelphia, is very unique in that it has a section of the city where all four teams, the main professional
Yeah, the complex. Yeah.
sports teams, the sports complex where they play. And
Right.
increasingly, there is kind of a sentiment is that if the Sixers want a new arena, let them build it there.
Right.
Let them
Right.
find a way to build it there. The acreage is there, so they should just stay there and leave Center City to find some other mechanism to draw people downtown, which is a valid concern. But I really do not believe, and many people who are design professionals, architectural professionals, and civic engagement people do not believe that this is a project that will really revitalize a downtown area in the
Right.
way they want it done.
Yeah. So I think people have gotten a lot smarter about that, and it's going to be harder to extract, especially public dollars, or even where the claim is that there are no public dollars. It's going to be hard to say that this is worth the investment and worth disrupting an area that a lot of people live in.
Yeah, particularly when
So
you keep saying that there's state and federal money, I find that very dubious.
yeah.
No matter who gets into office next year, there have been significant public spending on infrastructure legislation and whatnot. I don't know that the money is there for massive transportation investments, for example, that a stadium, that an
Right.
arena like this would need in either Philadelphia, Washington, or anywhere else in the country, and that people want to see their dollars spent that way.
It's a great piece, and y'all should go to prospect.org and check it out. We have a number of other sort of future of stories that were in our issue. My piece on that is on the future of television, actually, which I think cable television is dead in the water and is going to be gone in a couple of years. And what that means for local programming and what that means for news programming is actually a very, very open question.
Can I ask you a question about that, David? On
Please.
the table, if back in the day, there was a lot of call for a la carte, that instead of these
Right,
packages that you had to do, let people pick what they wanted. If you want 10 channels, let people pick. And that
right.
never flew.
Yeah.
If something like that had been allowed, do you think that that would have prolonged cable's lifespan if people just had the ability to say, I want these 10 channels or I want these 20 channels?
Right. I mean,
Because there's a lot of agitation for that.
in many ways, we're seeing that play out in streaming right now. So it is a la
That's
carte.
exactly
It's
what I
you,
see. Yeah.
but the problem is that that is a very hard business model for these companies. None of these streaming channels make money,
Mm,
even though they have a lot of programming attached to them. And one of the things that I write about is that we're starting to see these streaming channels say, well, what if we bundle together and we give people a product that is
exactly. That's like,
comprehensive?
oh,
So they're
now you want to do it.
recreating, yeah,
Now you're doing it.
they're recreating cable
Yeah.
in the streaming world. It's just not, it's very cost prohibitive. What we saw with these a la carte streaming channels, Netflix, Max, Paramount Plus, Amazon, Apple Plus, is that there became bidding wars for content because the only way to keep eyeballs onto your streaming site was to have new and fresh content all the time. And so
Mhm.
that the price of that was bid up, and then they couldn't hold people because what people would do is they'd go in, watch everything they wanted, and then cancel the service month to month. And there'd be a lot of what they call churn
Mhm.
out in and out of these streaming sites. And so they've decided they're going to buddy up. And then the other thing they're doing that's going to kill cable is that they're bidding for sports. Last year, in terms of cable and broadcast, 96 of the top 100 programs, most watched programs, were football games. 96 out of the top 100.
Yeah.
And one of the four that wasn't was the show they put on after the Super Bowl. So people just had their
Yeah.
television on that channel. So sports is really the only thing that is keeping people on the cable broadcast universe. And the thing is that most people get their broadcast channels through the cable box.
Right.
There aren't that many people that have antennas and stuff.
So doing a la carte would not have saved them.
I don't think so. I mean, it's just not cost effective
Mm,
because the way that these cable companies, the way the business model was, is that you would pay for what is called carriage
mm,
on a cable system. So the cable system would say, well, we want ESPN. So and ESPN would say, okay, give me $10 per subscriber, right? And if you did it a la carte, uh, the cable channels wouldn't get enough money because a lot of people would say, "Well, I don't want ESPN for $10, so I'm not going to buy ESPN for $10." If you don't bundle it, everyone's an island, and suddenly they don't have enough money to actually do the programming.
mm.
So bundling is actually a key from the business model standpoint. That's why I don't think it would work. And that's why it's not working in streaming. And so
Okay.
we're seeing that bundle recreated. The problem is it's an entertainment bundle and it's a sports bundle, but there's no news bundle. There is no news bundle. News is sort of an appendage here. CNN tried to do a streaming network from itself and it lasted like a week. It was the biggest failure in the history of streaming.
Mm,
Uh, uh, there doesn't seem to be an appetite for a streaming because news traditionally is a loss leader within a larger news network or television network like a CBS or an
right.
NBC.
Mhm.
The question is, when they make the move to streaming, are they going to say, do we keep the loss leader, or now we don't have any obligation? There's no FCC requirement. There's no licensing requirement. Should we keep the news channel or do we have to? Maybe not. And so I think it's a really interesting period of transition. And there are things that the government can do to say, in cable, the reason we get local channels in our cable is a thing called must carry.
Right.
And I'm simplifying it, but the FCC basically says, well, look, if you're a cable system and you're in a community, you have to have local programming in that community, and you have to have some, and usually that translates into news programming. You could do a must carry for streaming, where if a streaming channel is in a particular neighborhood, let's say there's a, Netflix is in or there's a bundle of Netflix and other channels in Los Angeles, they could say, you know what, you also have to stream the local channels. And so the government can actually mandate that in some way or another. So that piece also at prospect.org with our entire August issue, which is up and running right now. But we're out of time. Gabrielle, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it on the weekly roundup. We do this every week at 12:30 Eastern. And there will be an archive of this that you can watch on our YouTube channel or at prospect.org. We'll put it up for the weekend. So thank you all, and have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.